Today, we're looking at Noodler's Apache Susnset. Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm an ink guy. I get inks, test them, and share the results with you. Noodler's Apache Susnset is an orange ink. Before we get to the writing samples, I'd really like to look at the sciencey bits. Up first is the chromatography, and I agree with Vita that doing multiple chromatographies has taught me a lot over the years. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. I put a line of ink down, I let it dry, and then I let it creep up 10 to 15 seconds. We see this light pink line, this shading of sort of pink and orange up to a yellow, a very distinct yellow, all the way across the top. Now the one on the right, I let dry for 10 minutes before I dunk it into the water. And it looks exactly the same as the one done before it dried. There is no water resistance of this ink whatsoever. Resistance tests are done to see how it can be expected to hold up on paper or how hard it would be to clean out of the pen. I let the smear dry for 3 days before testing it. The highlighter surprisingly made the ink look a little bit darker on that part, which means while it didn't completely reactivate and feather all over the place and it darkened up some, the highlighter worked very well for it. Now the water shows that it is going to reactivate and come off the paper. Given it some time, that dark orange, it turned to a very light orange. More time, it's going to go away. The pen flush, we got the same reaction as the water, just a bit more of it. It became a much lighter orange than what was originally there. And bleach is completely taking it off that paper. This is a bell curve or a normal distribution. For the 365 inks I've tested, I have found an average viscosity of 2.5. Now, normal for the viscosity is the range from 2.1 to 2.9. Noodler's Apache Susnset has a viscosity of 1.7. That makes this a very wet flowing ink. It makes it friendly for a lot of pens, especially drying pens. And the shading that you can get from this ink, the fact that it works well with drying or dry pens is great. It's going to make that shade pop even more. This bell curve is for the average dry time. For the 365 inks I tested, I found an average dry time of 17 seconds, and the normal range was from 13 to 21 seconds. Now Noodler's Apache Susnset had an average dry time of 9 seconds. Its wet flow and fast dry time, especially with broader, wetter pens, is going to help truly bring out the shading that this ink is known for. To find the average dry time, I average the writing samples done with the extra fine and medium nib on Clairefontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper. Let's take a look at the writing sample. This ink I originally had in sample form, and after I used the sample, I wound up buying a bottle. So I have a bottle, and it doesn't show, but it's down to about here when I put the bottle down flat. So I'm still using quite a bit of it, which is nice. It's always nice when you can take an ink and it goes next level for you to where from a sample you say, yes, I want to go commit to a bottle. To keep writing samples consistent, I'm using a Jinhao 159 with a Goulet 1.1 stub. I use a Jinhao X450 with a Goulet medium and a Jinhao X750 with a Goulet extra fine. Let's look at Clairefontaine. Clairefontaine gives us no bleeding, no ghosting. Looking at the 1.1, we're not getting the color variation that I would expect with this. And the thing that's not going to show through in some of this in its writing samples is how much color variation I really do tend to get. These samples didn't give me as much as I often get, but they are as they are. The 1.1 has minor amounts of shading that occur. There's no bleed, no feather, no spread. Onto the extra fine. No bleed, no feather, no spread, no sheen. 5 seconds to dry, so it dried very quickly. We are getting some nice color variation on this ink. Again, not as much as I get regularly now, but when I was using this sample, I didn't get nearly as much of it. Onto the medium, no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen.
Again, really nice color variation that occurs. This is not painful on your eyes to read, even in finer nibs. 11 seconds to dry, and when we look at the scrubbies, we see a tremendous amount of color variation. This is more the color variation that I actually experience now, although I wasn't getting it in the writing sample. On the smear, because it's a very light colored ink, you may or may not be able to recover this, and that's just because it is such a light color of ink. Looking at Tomoe River, we have no bleeding. There's ghosting, a lot more on camera than in person. It's such a light ink that you can use both sides if this is what you're using. Onto the 1.1, we have no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, a lot more color variation than we had on the Clairefontaine. In the extra fine, we have no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. A lot of color variation starting to come through, still mostly the light. Still mostly the light color. I would like to be able to see more of the dark color. I would really like to be able to see more of that sunset that we get in the medium. We don't get so much in the fine. 8 seconds to dry with the fine or with the extra fine. Medium, no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. Lots of color variation starting to happen here. So we need wetter pens in order to really get that color variation. If you're a writer that uses extra fine, this might be an ink you're very unhappy with. 19 seconds to dry. Quite a bit longer than the extra fine. Tremendously longer than the extra fine. 2.5 times longer than the extra fine. But look at the color variation that occurs. So when you use this ink and you're getting some longer or longer dry times, that could be a reason why. We see a great spectrum of its colors that occur in both scrubbies. So we get to see it go from very light to very dark. Very light to very dark. So we know we can get a ton of color variation here. And when it comes to the smear, you don't get to recover that. Part of it's that it's light. Part of that is that it was Tomoe River. Looking at Rhodia paper. No bleeding. No ghosting. Or show through, whatever you want to call it. Onto the 1.1. We lost that color variation that I wanted. Almost entirely. We have no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. It's the loss of color variation that just jumps out to me. It's big. That's like a yellow ink. Only a couple spots that are dark. Onto the extra fine. No feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. Some color variation starting to show through. 4 seconds to dry. It dried real fast. These are moments where I wish I was keeping track of my temperature and humidity. This is some testing that I've got going on now just to see how it makes ink perform differently. But at this moment, I don't keep track of that. This sample dried in 4 seconds. Not a lot of color variation. Kind of boring this way. A little too yellow, but it's readable. Not painful on the eyes. Moving on to the medium. No feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. Lots of color variation. Great color variation. It looks like a sunset with the. We see it a lot in the quick. The brown is really nice in what we get here. So that's what I would love to see all the time. I don't know what went on this day. Obviously, it was a very dry day. The temperature would have been a little cooler. So here in Florida, where I see a lot of times in the high 80s for my humidity, this might have been one of those days where my humidity was down in the 50 to 60%. 9 seconds to dry on the medium. We look at the scrubby and we start getting a lot of that color variation shows up. I feel it here. You can't feel it on camera. I had to put this down kind of thick here. I can feel that I was a little aggressive. When I if I was to smear it, I don't know that I'm recovering this. I'm looking at Apache paper. No bleed, no show through, none whatsoever. Part of that's a function of it being a lighter ink. In the 1.1, no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. Very little color variation. It is not showing up. Again, it was the day of writing. I get way more myself now, which was the reason I bought the bottle. It had nothing to do with this writing sample. It had to do with when I was using that ink during my entire day. But looking at the extra fine, we have no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, almost no color variation, 5 seconds to dry. We go to the medium, it gets a little bit darker, we get a little bit more of the color variation. No feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, 9 seconds to dry. And in the scrubby, we start seeing all of that color variation that we can get, from the very lights to the very darks, in both the extra fine and the medium. And in the smear, the Apache paper being a little more absorbent, we actually might be able to recover this. It depends on how fine detailed whatever you were writing was. Nemacine, or namacenine. No bleeding, no ghosting. In the 1.1, this is a super smooth paper. This is a paper I absolutely love using. I just wish it didn't cost me so much to get a hold of. In the 1.1, we have no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. We're getting some color variation out of it, and the white paper really helps this color come out. I don't know that I want to use this on toned paper, but on white paper, beautiful. Extra fine. We have no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. We're getting color variation, not a ton of it. Bad day of writing, 5 seconds to dry. Had to be a very dry day, which is where I lost it, where it all went away. Medium, we get a lot more color variation, so there's some good news. No feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. We're getting that color variation. Look at dog. Look at lazy. Look at it all the way across. Beautiful color variation that's showing up in the medium. Twice as long to dry. So this is an ink that you want something that's going to make it take time to dry. It stays where it's at. It doesn't seem to fully level out where you lose that color variation. And we see that in a scrubby. We see full color variation in these scrubbies. The smear, gone. You're not recovering it. I'm not, at least. Maybe your eyes are good enough. But I wouldn't be able to recover that if I smeared it while I was writing. So that's what I got for the writing samples.
Instead of finding inks that look like Noodler's Apache Sunset, I would prefer to find an ink that would really complement that orange on the page. I was looking for a nice turquoise ink for this. I have chosen Noodler's Navajo Turquoise. Before I give my opinion on this ink, if you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. And if it's your first time here, I'd invite you to subscribe. To make sure I have a range of experience with this ink, I do the writing samples. I write with it for a day in a different pen. I then inked it up in a Delike Alpha to take my notes for this video. So what do I think of Noodler's Apache Sunset? I think everything about its shading is true. And at first, I didn't like it. I was using extra fine pens originally in the hobby, and I didn't get it. But as I got to broader pens, as I started to appreciate dry pens, I love this ink. I use this ink quite frequently, but make sure you use it in broader and wetter pens to actually get some of that color and shading out of it. So now the big question, would I buy a bottle of this ink? Yes, absolutely. I have bought a bottle of this ink because it is gorgeous to use. Thanks for watching.